Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Djaffar Shalchi, who is the founder of Millionaires for Humanity and the founder of Human Act, I believe. Yeah. And my old friend, Lars Koch, who is now the policy officer at Act and Aid. Yes. And Mogens Lykketoft, who previously was a finance minister, so will be able to fill us in on all the details, and was president of the General Assembly at the United Nations. And online, because of COVID and these things happen, we have Hannah Brejnholt. Hannah is the chair of the board at Eurodad and a financing for development policy officer at Oxfam. We've all come together to discuss a very timely issue, a historically important issue, and that's in a world awash with extreme wealth and extreme inequality, how far does the proposition of imposing a wealth tax on those at the very top provide a solution for the sustainable development goals? And I think we've got the right team to advise us on this. On the Move Humanity website, which you can look up if you're at home on your computers, I'm informed that 26 individuals hold the same amount of wealth as half the world's population. That's 3.8 billion people. I came here on a bus. The bus was half full. That is those 26 individuals. At the same time, COVID has increased extreme poverty in the world by 119 to 124 million people, according to the World Bank. So the proposition that's coming from Millionaires for Humanity is that we should take the 2,200 billionaires in the world and impose a wealth tax on them, or ask them to donate 1% per year of their wealth to solving the SDGs. That's one possible solution, and I'm going to try and push the panel around on this a little bit, because I can think of others. We could just simply make tax schedules more progressive throughout the world. We could equalize income taxes and capital taxes. We could increase the policy space which comes with multilateral financial assistance. We could stop capital flowing uphill. We live in a world where, funnily enough, capital flows from the poor countries to the rich countries, often to my hometown of London. We could simply eliminate the huge volumes of odious debt that exist in the system, or we could rewrite the global intellectual property rules that mean that 4 companies account for 40% of the US economy. But we're going to discuss this solution, and we're going to try and gauge how far this solution is complementary to some of the things that I've mentioned, or how far it can stand alone as a solution to the problems that we share. So I'm going to kick off with Hannah, because Hannah's not in the room. I'm going to ask, why a wealth tax and why now?
Right, so let's start on the why wealth tax, why now? And why now? I think it's quite clear that there's, as you said, inequality is rising, and really we want to redistribute wealth, and this can be done through a wealth tax. And I would say probably wealth taxes in the plural. We might get back to that, but I think that the one tax, we shouldn't have one tax standalone. It's always a whole puzzle of different taxes that we need to look at. But just on the why now, I think that it's not only why now, it's back to 2008 and the financial crisis. Then we had a huge growth in interest around taxation. We needed more money to fund public services. At the moment, it's come back again. It's health, it's education, it's social security. So there's a huge need for more money to finance public services. So obviously, there's another increase in interest. And I think also we have a window at the moment. I'll say the sort of the World Bank, the IMF are talking about wealth taxes. We're really some of the institutions that haven't always been sort of huge proponents of wealth taxes are now starting to talk about it. And even today, we had one of the Danish pension companies come out and say that they were in favor of property taxes or sort of capital gains on property. So we have a window right now. So right now we need to seize this opportunity and we need to move. And then this is one of the solutions or one of the ideas, but it does need to go with some of the others. And I'm happy to talk lots more, but I also know that there are 3 others in the panel.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Lars, you threatened to tell us a long story about why now. Can you tell us it in short form, please?
I can try. I think first of all, a wealth tax is morally just. When you see what is happening, particularly during this pandemic, the COVID crisis, where you have seen inequalities exposed to a level that we have not seen before. And we're talking about an economic crisis, but it's only an economic crisis to the 90 or 99%, to the 1% in the top. This is not an economic crisis. This is just a tivoli of wealth increase during this pandemic. So you see a crisis where the governments are holding the hands under companies, under employers, and at the same time, you see the 1% profiting tremendously from this crisis. Now, that's a reason for a wealth tax, but it's also, my historic example is also when you introduced new taxes was during times of war and times of crisis. In Denmark and globally, you started introducing income taxes at a significant level after the First World War, and you increased them after the crisis in the 30s and after the Second World War to finance the crisis and finance the war times, like we did in the 400 years back when we were in war with the Swedes. The king was raising taxes to finance wars. So during times of crisis, during times of war, that is where you have the opportunity to increase taxes to finance all the things that the government has to do to make us come out of the crisis. So it's time now after this pandemic, after this economic crisis, most of us are facing, to introduce this kind of taxes.
Okay. But whenever you introduce a new tax, unless you're going to do it with a sword in your hand, you face opposition. There are forces in the system that oppose radical change. And I wonder, Mogens, as a very experienced politician, how do you see the kind of force, the battlefield here? Who's in it, and what positions are they occupying, and where are the weaknesses and where are the strengths, if we want to think about how to actually execute this?
Well, I think the shortest observation of what we're up against is when I asked Joe Stiglitz what your conclusion in this book about increasing inequality, and then he answered me, maybe we only have the best government money can buy. So we have a lot of fighting, and the reason that the wealth tax probably not will solve the problem if we do it alone is that most of the wealth, the most extreme inequality in wealth is in the United States. So how we break that equation is very, very difficult to see, because you see how influential the greedy part of the billionaires have gained in the political system. So I think there is this increasing understanding of the need to fight inequality. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you can say the basic conclusion is, yes, sustainable development will take a lot of investment in climate and so on. It will take a lot of investment to diminish inequality, poverty, and we have seen up till now an increasing inequality, dramatically increasing inequality. Also now during the pandemic, we had a short window in history where at least extreme poverty were decreasing, but now it's also increasing again. So we need new sources. And I don't think we can exclude any of the avenues you mentioned at the beginning. And we could add inheritance taxes. We could add much stronger legislation against monopolies and trusts if we should fill out the whole picture. But raising this discussion about wealth tax is putting the finger exactly of what went wrong during the last 4 decades, since Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and new liberalism taking over, taxes, especially for the rich, being cut down, and regulations on financial markets and monopolies being diminished.
Yeah, but we're not talking about a donation here. So one idea is that we should talk nicely to the billionaires, and they will kindly donate 1% of their wealth. What we're talking about here is a government tax, and I spend a lot of my time looking at governments fighting each other over taxes, and obviously the world is full of jurisdictions and states that specialize in attracting capital, both individually held and corporate held, into their jurisdictions and offering them a low or 0% tax environment. So if we're going to impose a tax and change the law, and I'm asking you, Djaffar, this question, how on earth can we ensure that states don't, what should I say, pee in the bathwater?
First of all, I think we have two major problems today. The one thing is the safety, and the other thing is democracy. As you all know, the total wealth of the world is $400 trillion, and the top 1% possess more than half of it. And is that being calculated? Like the UN has been out and saying, Antonio Guterres, then in only 3 years' time, the top 1% will have about 75% of that. Imagine 1% of the top 1% will give you $2 to $3 trillion. And that is exactly the financing gap for all the 17 sustainable development goals. So we have enough wealth to manage that, actually. So as you can see on our website, we are quoting Martin Luther King. I was born in 61, and he said in 61, we have all the technology that we have today. In 61, they have all the resources, but he said, we don't have the human will. And that's the exact thing we are fighting against today. And the two major problems are, the first thing, to have the top 1% have so much power, we just make our world so unsafe. If you travel to let's take Brazil or some places in the US or some places in other countries, you can see how inequality really are in danger. And for who? Mostly for the rich people. And the other thing is that we are controlling so much our political systems in the different countries, especially in the US, where behind every senator is a billionaire. And the same thing in other countries. So, and that is actually something that I say, if we don't address that problem, then we will never face to get any governments to make any taxes. So we have to make so much awareness about this, so the general population go out and vote for the right people to come inside the parliaments, so they can really solve and benefit everybody. And, you know, the idea behind, we don't leave anybody behind, don't matter who they are.
Yeah. But
your question also. Our idea is that the 1% don't go into the government box. It go to a SDG fund that is monitored by the government, of course. If it's in Denmark, the Danish government, some from the UN, civil society, and so on. Of course, it has to go to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to tackle inequality, extreme poverty, the wars, and so on, because inequality is not only to tackle one thing, and that is the beauty of the SDGs. And the other beauty is that Mogens Lykketoft was actually there in 2015 when all 193 countries actually adopted it and signed it. So they are actually obligated to find the money for that. But it's the elephant in the room. Nobody is talking about the financing thing. So when we came up with the idea in 2017 at the UN, SDSN, actually they have it still on the website. The only one solution they still have that they're promoting is because it's so powerful and it will not hurt anybody because it's so low. It's only 1%.
Well, I can imagine a situation where I can't actually, but let me try. But I can imagine I'm a billionaire and I can look at the world and I can think, well, you know, my wealth and my happiness and my peace of mind, etc., is threatened by the potential of social instability. So I'm a billionaire. I can say, well, okay, I can see maybe we need to rebalance the economy, rebalance society in some way, but we still don't get away from, whether we've got a commitment at the UN or not, we still don't get away from the fact that we live in a world where, one, approximately half the legal jurisdictions, the states or jurisdictions, are effectively what we call tax havens. And at this particular juncture, I would have thought, trying to persuade a government to impose a 1% tax on their extremely wealthy citizens and then send that straight out of the country when voters might be saying, well, look, we need jobs, we need technological investment, we need a green economy. So I wonder, Hannah, would you like to come in on this? I see
Yes.
On the edge of your seat.
Yes, exactly, as always. Yeah. No, I think that in principle, in theory, the idea is good, having this type of wealth tax, but I think you're pointing exactly at one of the issues is how do we redistribute this? So if it goes to a fund in the UN, and that's the good thing about the UN is that all countries have a seat and are there on equal footing, unlike the OECD, for example. So from my point of view, obviously, I'm interested in supporting developing countries and their voice. But how do we define where the taxes, like how do we redistribute this? So it can go to the SDGs, but essentially at the end of the day, it needs to go back to countries who will be implementing the SDGs. So I think that's one of the technicalities that we will have to sort out on this. It's one of the issues and the problems. And then one thing that we also touched upon just briefly before is like talking about a wealth tax. And I think you also mentioned this, it's also talking about there's several wealth taxes. So there's income, there's your property, it might be your housing, because of jewelry, yachts and paintings, or what do I know? You have your capital gains. And so when we're talking about wealth tax, we're not only talking about one tax, we're actually talking about several different ones, at least 3. So we also need to think about this. So how do we tax this? And then obviously, how do we know where this income, this wealth is based? Is it based in tax havens? In that case, we'll need a lot more transparency. We're working on that. Country by country reporting, beneficial ownership, so we can actually see who owns this. And then obviously then the EU has its tax haven list, which is awfully flawed and not super efficient, but it is at least trying to address the issue around transparency. But I think the redistribution, or the formula according to which we'll be redistributing, I mean, that's going to be, I think that's probably the difficult fight in all of this. And we see it playing out already, sort of on tech firms and today the EU, the Commission came out with a communication around business taxes and sort of how to deal with that. It's the same sort of thinking that goes about that. Yeah, I can see Djaffar wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, sorry, Djaffar, you have your thing.
Yeah, I just have my smartphone here. There's more technology in that than all NASA had that they get first time a man to the moon. I mean, come on. If we have the money, we really cannot solve. We have all the technology that we need. We have blockchain. We have so many things. And there's groups of professors in Germany and other countries that I have talked to, said everything is in place. We just need the money. You know, is the elephant in the room. We have to get the money on the place. Then of course we can do it. I mean, come on. We are talking about the same things again. That is like, you know, we were talking about before about tax havens. The tax havens is go all through the SWIFT system. We can solve that in 2 minutes if we want that. But nobody wants it because the rich people are controlling that. That is the problem.
I wonder if the political realist in the room would agree that it's just a matter of political will and we can solve all these problems. We just need to make a decision. Or do you see more substantive obstacles?
It's more important that some make the decision than others try to make it. I mean, the very optimistic note we can mention now is what Biden has said about tax evasion. and about minimum taxation of huge corporation taxes. If the initiative comes from that direction, there is a hope. But of course, with the participation of the United States and the European Union, we could kill most of the tax evasion.
Exactly.
That's the point here. And I think personally that the most immediate possibilities to get more revenue to the states to fulfill sustainable is in fighting tax evasion. There are huge resources here. And that's possible. When and how we will be able to agree on a specific wealth tax is more difficult to say, but as I said, I think the exemplification of the problem by raising this issue is very, very important. And one thing more, you talked about how to convince billionaires. I think some have the humanity and the morale to say this is necessary. Others will be convinced if they listen to historians, if we continue with that kind of inequality and instability that we have in the world right now, we are facing revolutionary times.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm quite sure. I don't know how to spell out. It can be terrible, it can be bloody, it can be destabilizing for earning money. But anyway, we have to realize ordinary people, poor people will no longer accept to pay the taxes they have when they see that billionaires and huge companies have much less tax rates than they have. And that's what we have created in the last 40 years globally. That's what we have been creating after the financial crisis with the austerity policies and so on. And still reducing marginal taxes on rich people. It will not be accepted any longer. If we should get, you could say, if you should get the popular support, an enduring popular support for climate action, you have to get a fair distribution of the financing of the whole thing.
Lars.
No, yeah, I think the wealth tax is one component, but we also have to recall that we are maybe right now, this year, in a historic opportunity, a historic moment after the pandemic, and with the enduring climate crisis, which needs to be financed, the green transition. The social contract has been broken during this pandemic. It's been so obvious to many people that when you look at the vaccination of people globally, you see, I'm having my first injections this evening because I'm rich and white and old, and live in a rich country. Most of the countries, most of the people in developing countries, they don't get anything. And this exposing inequalities at a ridiculous level creates momentum right now for making not only stepwise changes. No, we've got to make it revolutionary, not like a violent revolution, but we've got to be ambitious. And we've got to say, wealth tax, yes, but I think we've got to start at the country level. That's where it will come from. We have to introduce, like they're discussing in the US, like we're discussing in many countries, introducing a wealth tax. We have it in Norway, for an example, increasing corporate taxes, increasing high taxes on high income earners, but also look at, we're talking with taxes about redistribution. When we first have a distribution which is very unequal, we have to discuss the pre-distribution. How do these people get to earn that much? Why are these tech millionaires, billionaires from Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, who have earned hundreds of millions of billions of Danish krones during this pandemic? Why do they get to earn that much? Is that fair? We also have to address that distribution of income before we start taxation. But we have a moment right now where we have to be very ambitious and seize these opportunities that we are seeing, where people are furious about this broken social contract when they see the elites running away with the fortunes while ordinary people increasingly living in poverty.
But maybe you give me a good segue into something else I wanted to But before I do that, I will let Hannah come in on this.
Yeah, it's just an addition to all of this. I mean, you're very right around the pre-distribution act. How did people ever get this rich? How did they earn their money? Did they inherit it? Did they earn it because, like now we're talking about Jeff Bezos, how did he get so rich? Well, he earned money because other people were working for him. So basically it was their work, not his own. So people become rich, not because of their own work, but because of something else. But the other thing is also, just to add to that, I think that one of the things that also really gets people angry is if you look at the taxes. So that's why wealth tax, we really do need to look at this, because you have personal income tax, which is generally much higher, sort of percentage-wise, than your taxes on corporate income tax or capital gains taxes or lots of other taxes. So that's where, like, also when you look at these things, it's like, why is my personal income tax so much higher than if I had a big company? Or like, so there's also very sort of very unfair taxes, or very not very level at least. And I just wanted to throw in on these things that on the opportunity just now, we also have Argentina that introduced a wealth tax. It's for the period. It's because of COVID is the argument. It's a good argument. At least it's a hook that you can use. So that's another reason that we have an opportunity right now. It may be terminated, but at least there's a country, and I think Munchu was saying that, like, at least one country has to make a start. So we might not get everybody on board, but some countries have to make a move, and some countries are making a move also. Some of the very unequal countries like Argentina. Okay, I'll stop now.
Thanks. Okay, but now I'm going to really play the devil's advocate a little bit here. And maybe this will be a little bit uncomfortable for me, but here we go. Let me make an argument. You know, I'm a billionaire, and there are forces in the system which threaten my wealth. One way to calm those waters, to calm those forces, to respond to that call, is to pay 1% of my wealth per year as a wealth tax to finance the SDGs. And that may well be my preferred way of doing this, because if it's seen as a solution, and if it's seen as an adequate response, then I can carry on making my hundreds of millions of dollars every year or 2 or 3 years, and the system simply doesn't change. And I mean, if we think about the Gates family obviously have their personal problems at the moment, but one of them is not their wealth. I mean, they've been desperately trying to give it away, but the system is behaving in such a way that I believe, 10 years ago that they had 120 billion, and they gave away more than 50 billion now, and they've got 120 billion. Now, that points to me that this couldn't only be a sticking plaster on a gaping wound, but it could also be a way of legitimizing the status quo. So I think I will go to Djaffar on that, because you've got your cards on the table here with this. So I mean, is this actually a way of legitimizing the system as it works, and is it conservative?
Let's take Bill Gates first.
Okay.
I talked to him in September 2018,
yeah.
And he was not at that time. He said, "No, Djaffar, I will not do it myself. I don't believe in the tax system." He was by himself. I think he's changed a little bit his mind by now. But actually, when he started the Giving Pledge, it was in 2010, when he was out to his fellow billionaires. There was about 2,000 of them. He said, "Let's give half of our wealth away while we are alive or when we are died." And at that time, he had not 120, he had about 100.
Okay.
And he has given about 45 billion away up till now. And his wealth is over 100. So he has a problem, actually, a great problem by why are you not following your own example? And why are you getting richer? So I see the 1% as a starting point. You have to open the door a little bit, So that is the key, actually just putting inside the lock, not even opening it yet. So when we see the power in that, then I think it would be more normal to say, okay, that was the 1%, we fixed this, and now we have to fix this. We could put it up to 3%, 5%, 10%, and so on. So that is, for me, just a starting point. I think it's extremely difficult to go out and say to billionaires, we are going to get 40% of your wealth because you don't need it. I think that would be nearly impossible to start with. But the 1%, people come to me, the 1% say, just to, don't listen to them anymore and hear them say, okay, here the 1%, let me do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's much easier to get through that.
But that's my point.
That's why we're starting there.
But isn't that my point?
Yeah.
Let me give you the 1% and let me just do what I'm doing. I mean, the world doesn't change.
Yes, it is due, because when you have the 1% going on, then you get it higher and so on, because then they are used to it. The general population say, hey, it's working. Then it will be easier to raise that, You have to get the system in place first. Okay?
But it's also, as Mogens said, it's also about the other elements of what creates the extreme wealth. That is, the increase we see in Denmark and other countries in property rates during this pandemic, where when rich people here in Copenhagen owning a house, they earn, if they earn more than I earn a year from the raise in their properties values. And why don't we tax that? And we're discussing that, why don't we increase the tax on corporate profits? Why don't we address the capital gains from when you sell off your company? They are hardly taxed. They often move to tax havens. Let's address also these other sources of creating the extreme wealth.
Including also intervention in the markets. That's about monopolies and trusts. That's about monetary policy. The monetary policy we have been seeing in the Western world in the past 10, 15 years has been a major factor in building up enormous increases in property and share value.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. If you pump out that much money and you have had a very, very low interest rate, and rich people are earning enormously through that, actually, because that has been a vehicle for increased financial values, increased property values. It has been said, well, it has been reasonable to have a zero rate system because we have no inflation. No, we have no inflation in goods and services that much, but we have in property values, we have in share values, enormous inflation, caused also by the very heavy use of monetary policy instead of fiscal policy.
No, it's been something strange and weird, I think, since the global financial crisis to be watching, the creation or the dissipation of risk from the pinnacle of society down onto everybody, and the result of that being emergency measures by central banks, and the result of that being the rich get even richer because asset prices inflate hugely. But I can see that Hannah wants to come in now, so I shall be quiet.
No, sorry to interrupt. No, I just wanted to sort of on the whole issue of, isn't it like, is a 1% only a plotter and an open source? Yes, the whole structure is a structural issue. The whole system doesn't work. Our tax system was set up 100 years ago when we were driving around in Ford T's. So the whole system doesn't work. The whole system is skewed. So the 1% tax on wealth, I think we started out on this. That's one of the ways of redistributing, but it does have to go along with an awful lot of other things. So there are other wealth taxes to be looked at national level, because this is the way that most of our wealth is basically national. Taxes are a national issue, so that's where it would be natural. So the suggestion of Djaffar's and the Human Act plus others is sort of alongside that has to be coupled with other things. So we do need to look at other wealth taxes. We have to bring up some of the taxes. We have to close tax loopholes. There are huge amounts of tax loopholes, and we don't, as ordinary people, we can't use them. But as a multinational company, you can just transfer your income. You can hide it in a tax haven. You can deduct all sorts of things for, I don't know, interest rates or like loans or investments that you maybe made. And so there are a lot of other things to be looked at. And So the 1% is just, I would say, it's an add-on. But it's a hugely important signal to send politically. 1%, of course, is negligible when we're paying much more in our own income tax. So of course it should be higher. Maybe it's a foot in the door to kind of like gently move it up. Not so gently, but we do have to look at a lot of other things. So that's why looking at only one wealth tax is not enough.
But I think Mogens sort of pushes me towards another topic I wanted you guys to talk about. So I mean, we talk about the financial crisis and central bank policy, and that being a sort of, if you talk to the Danish central bank, they say, well, we have an inflation target, that's our mandate, that's all we can do. But it does point, I mean, then we could think in that context, we could think about central banks actually directing credit to certain parts of the economy. But I mean, I think a lot of people in the audience are interested. Okay, it sort of makes sense, and we're going to get the wedge in the door, and we're going to open the door wider and wider, and the world's going to be a happier place for my 6-month-old daughter, which will be great. But I wonder about the mechanics of this. So, in the example of the central bank, is it helicopter money, etc.? We're not talking about central banks here, but that 1% is there. What are the mechanics of making this a kind of operational system to make sure that these 17 SDGs are met in some way? I mean, you just put, if we just put a pile of money somewhere, it tends to float to the top, unfortunately. So how do we ensure that if we can get this policy in place, that it actually has the effect that we want it to? I mean, what sort of institution? Do we need a new institutional framework? Do we need a different sort of development world? I mean, what do we need? Because we've been talking about the SDGs for a long time, and there's a whole kind of industry built around talking about the SDGs, but we don't seem to be getting there. So Hannah? Yeah, and
I think you're touching upon one of the issues is also, so if we have a global institute like the UN, UN fund, but how do we as a general broad public ensure the redistribution for the priorities of the people, and that will be down to national level. So what do we want in Denmark might not match what one wants in Nigeria. What are the needs there? So there's an issue of governance there, which is super important as well. So it's like trying to look at several aspects at one time, but the governance issue is hugely important. So once a pot of money lands with a government somewhere, how is it redistributed, and how does that government ensure that it actually lives up to the wishes of its people? So there's the mutual accountability part, which is a little bit difficult with the wealth tax, because you're not necessarily accountable directly to the millionaires who paid it. That's not who you want to be prioritizing in this instance. So there's certainly an issue around governance and deciding on the priorities of your people, broadly speaking. And then back to the whole power issue, who's in power? Well, generally they're the rich elites, and that's why it's so difficult to introduce property taxes and wealth taxes generally, because they aren't generally in favor of them. So certainly a huge governance issue on that as well, which has to be worked on. And I just like to say that of course it's not impossible, Djaffar, you're quite right. Of course, let's get the money on the table and then work out the technicalities. Of course, we shouldn't lose our energy and our interest in doing so just because it's difficult. But governance issues huge.
But Djaffar, you must have spent some time thinking about this, because you've dedicated a good bit of your recent years to sort of promoting this and getting this whole idea off the ground. And it's kind of exciting, and the Millionaires for Humanity sort of tag can sell the project really well. But as a kind of a long-term player, when you start a football match, anything can happen by half time. So what do you see in the future? How do you strategize of making, ensuring that this project isn't just a sticking plaster on a gaping wound, but it actually is the wedge that opens the door? I mean, how do we strategize that? How do we make this really matter?
Yeah, first of all, I have followed the UN's SDSN, Sustainable Development Solution Network,
right,
that Jeffrey Sachs is the director
What's that?
of. They just put the CSN up to find the solutions, but exactly what we are talking about. How are we going to do it? if the money is in place. And all the SDG goals has all special groups and professors that working and has the solutions. They're all just actually just waiting for the financing to come in place so they can go with it. But that is again the elephant in the room. Nobody is talking about it, and the UN is screaming after it. All the sessions I have been in the UN is, doesn't matter, is Anthony Guterres himself, I mean Mohammed or somebody else, they're all saying, hey, we have to find the financing for this. And they say it again and again and again and again. And our plan is actually to get a UN resolution, soft resolution on this. So we are searching for 1, 2, 3 countries that actually put this up to the UN to be adopted. And most of countries don't have the rich people. So imagine this come up, it will be a huge yes. And then you have a soft resolution, like when the UN did it with the ODA, 0.7%, come on, let's help the poor country. The same will come here. UN resolutions for the SDGs, recommending each of the member states to go out and make a wealth tax and find the financing because they have signed to solve the problems. And then you will adopt it in each countries, and each country will have the SDG fund that they will put up, again, monitored. And again, we have a lot of technology that can manage the money, so nothing will be stolen from it.
Great.
So that is what we are running for,
So
a UN soft resolution.
That's a great kind of positive image as we're getting towards the end of our discussion here, but it's a very positive image, and we're seeing this kind of cascading effect emerging from the initiative. I mean, Lars, you are the expert in how to harness democracy, harness the people for a cause. So I mean, I think I'll end by asking you, we have an audience here is super interested by this. I guess they're motivated because they've even come on another Zoom call to listen to us. So I mean, what would you say to the people that are listening now? What can they do? I mean, Djaffar's doing his thing. Mogens got all his mates at the UN. I can teach my students at CBS that tax evasion and avoidance is a bad thing. What do you think the audience can do to make sure that there is momentum behind this?
Just saying that I think it's a great plan. It's great if we can mobilize this financing. That is what is needed. But I mean, change historically always has come from within countries. I mean, change is not coming from aid from foreign countries providing support. Change is coming when people mobilize within countries to demand a change. And we not only need a change at the global level or Denmark or the US, we also need that change in Mozambique or in India or in Nigeria, and people there demanding a change. And that's the same I'll call for the students who are looking at this. I mean, I love the Sustainable Development Goals, and I appreciate, I would have, wow, you were there when you adopted these goals. I love them. On the other side, I hate them because they're kind of becoming a blah, blah, blah speech. And if you look at them at their core values, they are transformational. I mean, they are about focusing on those left behind, putting them first and empower them to demand the change. And that's what, I mean, we should hope for in Nigeria, and we should hope for from Danish students, and hope for in the US, that people, see what has happened post this pandemic, see the inequality has risen to dramatic and extreme levels, and demand a change in those systems that, keep that inequality rising.
I just want to point out that I think the Sustainable Development Goals are more revolutionary than anything else that have come out of the United Nations, because it's a total frontal attack on the basic ideas of neoliberalism, namely that unlimited growth is possible, and for that reason it's not very important how it's distributed. Well, what the Sustainable Development Goal says is the opposite. You have to limit at least the kind of growth we have now in order to save the globe, and for that reason also, but also because of the huge increase in inequality we've seen over 40 years, we have to tax the rich. And we will not eradicate poverty without doing it. And we have all the studies, Piketty, and we have, which is maybe the most important news, when the director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, stands up and talks for a wealth tax.
Yeah.
Something is happening in this world. Yeah.
Exactly. And not to mention the last 4 decades, the biodiversity has gone down 60%. I mean, we are totally destroying our planet. We have to fight it for the young people, my children, grandchildren, and so on. Otherwise, we will not have anything.
Yeah.
And if we do like we are doing now, the next 2 or 3 decades, then it's too late.
I think Hannah would like to come in.
Yes. Now, so back on your question on what can people who are listening in do? Get engaged in the whole conversation. Let's change the narrative. I want to say take to the streets, but let at least sort of get engaged in the conversations and make it clear that this is completely unfair and things have to change now. And the COVID-19 crisis, alongside the climate crisis, we have a looming debt crisis. There's so many crises at the moment. Now is the time that we need to act. And one can act by engaging conversations, discussions, put pieces in op-eds and basically vote. Think about, like, voices and votes really count. So that's one very sort of tangible thing one can do. And of course, one can get engaged in the work that both we in Oxfam and also in Action Aid do on tax. So, and then there are all the other crises to solve as well. And we need money for that. So debt can undermine the whole discussion we're having around tax at the moment. So we need to not forget about that. We need to solve our climate crisis as well. We need climate justice. It's hugely unfair the way the climate crisis has come about. So lots of things to kind of get your juices up about and take to the streets.
Absolutely. And you know, we live in a world which I thought I'd never see, where the World Bank and the IMF are constantly writing reports saying that inequality is actually detrimental to growth. So there certainly is some momentum in the system, I think, for these types of changes, and I think there's obviously a historical need for these changes to come now and to come quickly. And I think Djaffar's in the lead here and putting a wedge in the door and kind of opening up that space and enabling, providing some sort of basis to address the SDGs. But I should, it is my task now to open up the floor to our audience, and I think we have about 10 minutes to sort of discuss some other questions. I've been looking at this one, which is a question after my own heart. What influence would you have on how that 1% wealth tax is being spent beyond greenwashing? I don't know who would like to answer that provocative question.
I will say I will demand that also this top 1% is on the table when the SDG fund is established in Denmark. So it's not only the Danish government, but some from the UN, as I said, some from civil society, some of those who actually are giving the money to look and monitor that money, that it will be spent at the right way and not be stolen, and so on and so on.
Okay. Someone sent a question in before we started talking this afternoon, and I found it super interesting, and I think it's a way of provoking or asking you to think about, can we box clever with this money? Can we design innovative means of intervention? And I don't know who it was, but thanks for the question, whoever it was, and here it is. Can millionaires invest into impact investments? And what I took that to mean, and it was slightly longer, whoever it is, my apologies for shortening your question, but the idea of de-risking. So using this 1% to de-risk more large-scale interventions in the least developed countries and developing countries. So I think about COVID here. And the pharmaceutical companies are obviously very worried about their patents at the moment, poor them. But we should remember that the state de-risked their entire investment. and they actually have come out of it with a historically important piece of technology, which they're going to be making money out of, I guess, for rather a long time. So, I mean, so using this money to de-risk change in developing countries, I think is a really super idea. Or are there other more sort of subtle, more targeted mechanisms that you would think about using or creating, being innovators yourselves, and you all are in different ways? So I don't know, Lars, would you like
Two
to?
things on that. If de-risking implies that you do investments, but then you have a kind of a financial support to de-risk, to take out the cost. I mean, still, that is still based on, you got to have a return on your investment. It will be smaller. I mean, but what we're talking about here when we discuss the SDGs, that is education, that is health, that is, I mean, women's rights. It's ending inequality. I mean, that is not an investment where you get a financial return. I mean, public education and the right to health, that's not an area where you should get a return. That's a right of people. So to me, the more innovative way of designing the investments is to let the people who are actually facing the challenges come in with much stronger influence and power to decide on where should the investments go, instead of having, I mean, some very rich people or some UN or Danish bureaucrats designing these systems. I want to give people at the ground the voice to influence this. I mean, they are the ones who should be targeted. They know what is needed.
So not another sort of imperial exercise, but more grassroots sort of mechanisms to decide how this money is used.
It's about empowering those people who want to help to design these things and to monitor the things are, I mean, meeting their needs.
Yeah, Hannah, yes, please.
No, I just totally second what Lars said about having people's voices heard and having them decide. So this is part of the governance issue and the accountability, which is a little bit broken here on because we'd have the money in the UN, but it really is important that the people whom we want to support with this, it's their voices who are heard. So it's basically investing in them and investing in these social sectors that don't give a great financial return on your investment. But the return on investment is really human capital. So investing in these parts of the SDGs is super important. And this is also where the private money generally doesn't go, and it shouldn't necessarily go there either. So just to second that as well.
Yeah, thank you. There's another great question here. I can't see who it's from, but it says a wealth tax in one country is very small bread, small cheese. That's what I'd call it. Is there a more global and systemic way of thinking about wealth taxes? So we've mentioned that we'd like to start it in a couple of countries, and I think the question is, well, yeah, this is small cheese. I mean, let's look at Denmark, 5 million people. I'm not sure how, you probably know how many billionaires are here, but I guess not that many. Is it small cheese? Is there any way we can launch this at a grander scale? Djaffar?
But I think it's many of the things that we have done, even the SDGs, was not like everybody country come and sign this the first day. There was one country, two countries, and then the last country was hard, but then they could push for it and say, hey, look, this country has adopted this. So the wealth tax will just be the same, especially if the UN get the UN solution on it and go out and say, hey, we have a vote here, majority of the countries say, yes, we want to have a wealth tax. Then you can try to push, and the countries, or more countries comes up, is a domino effect. And then you will have it. Because again, they have signed to solve the SDGs. So there will be another leg on that to continue with it. So we have to start at one place. And I think today we have about, 10 countries with wealth tax.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hannah, you've got
just to say that of course this isn't a silver bullet that fixes everything. So back to our one of the things that keeps coming up, we need to couple with lots of different initiatives. So this may be one little corner and one little part of it.
I would say $300 trillion is a big corner, because that kind of money you can't find any other places to get, because they are in the hands of the top 1%. So any solutions must have the rich people inside the solution. Otherwise, you will never get the trillions in place, because we are not talking about the billions. We are talking of the trillions. and they are, sorry to say it, in the pockets of the rich people. So simple is that.
Mogens,
we will have to move forward where the softer spots are, where we can get through. Is it inheritance tax? Is it profit taxation? Is it higher marginal taxes? Is it wealth tax? Or is it, as I said several times during this conversation also, is it by breaking some of the fundamental inequalities in the markets so that we can get a more equal distribution of wealth and income through that? So yes, if we could do it at this very moment, it would solve a lot of problems, but it will be a very incremental way forward, where I think we have much momentum, but I think a lot of it will be solved in national initiatives. Hopefully some of it will be solved in European initiatives, and hopefully there will be some constitutional breakthrough in the US, so what the majority really wants will actually happen sometime.
Yeah, imagine if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren's suggestion about wealth tax go through in the US. Imagine that, how that will push Europe and many other countries to say, hey, because when Europe says something, then we follow it. You can say Biden is saying about the corporate tax, and now everybody, hey, that's a great idea. But come on, we have talked about that the last 3 decades, you know? So it's like, no, the US has the power. So if they are going to get through with this wealth tax, I promise you, many of the European countries will follow. Yeah.
So thank you. And on that note, I will draw us to a close. And I'm being prompted by my co-author to kind of do a self-citation here. So I will try and weave it in. You know, we've spent 30 years in academia and in the policy world talking about global value chains, and that work is all about how to produce more at greater efficiency across different countries in globally dispersed production processes. And what Len and I would suggest, and what this conversation I think suggests, is we need to change our gaze, change what we're looking at, change our orientation. And we need to talk about global wealth chains and how global processes of wealth accumulation and rent seeking are leading to this situation where we have these incredible numbers that we opened up this conversation with. And I'm more persuaded at the end of this conversation than I was at the beginning, that a wealth tax is perhaps a very useful wedge in the door to get towards a place where we can make more systemic changes and address these global and common problems, because I know we've long left behind a world where we can think this is a problem somewhere else. And if I think we'd all agree, if we don't address this now, it's going to come back to bite even me at my grand old age. I might get bitten by it before I'm in the coffin, and certainly my kids are going to be bitten by it. But I just want to say thank you so much for a really, really interesting, compelling, persuasive and provocative conversation. And I hope all of us will go away from it with a bit of a spring in our step and hope in our hearts for a better future, and not a better future in 70 years, because as Keynes said, we'll all be dead by then, but a better future right now, right here, and everywhere else too. So thank you very much for a great conversation this afternoon. And thank you, Hannah, for coming in last minute online because of this wretched COVID business interfering with us actually meeting in person. So that was great.
How are you? Maria, yeah. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, and thank you to the audience, of course, for joining us. Much appreciated.